videos when they come out. You can also, it's a great place to go back to look at all the other videos of mine, my father's, and a lot of good information there. So some of the news updates, they haven't changed much since last month actually, but we just want to remind you we do have online ordering if you're wanting to do that. Our monthly special has been colon active the past month. Actually, we're just now changing that to echinacea, great North American herb, and especially used by the Native Americans for many years. It goes back hundreds of years, probably thousands of years, historical use. I also want to point out and keep pointing out our one of our newest products is Colon Active. It's a really great probiotic / prebiotic, or if you want to be more specific, symbiotic product. All the bacteria in Colon Active are ones that will colonize the gut. They'll stay there. There's other bacteria that don't. And some of them are good to take, don't get me wrong, but this one is designed to be one blend of just bacteria that will colonize in the gut and really build your intestinal flora up. It's especially good for digestive health and metabolic health, and we have talked about that in the past. If you're interested in how it affects metabolism or digestion, you can go back and look at a previous talk on that very topic. But now let's move on to our main topic for this evening, CBD oil, and understanding the science, but not so much the science yet. That maybe get a little bit more into that in a subsequent one. And what we're not going to talk about, that probably some people would like for us to, is the efficacy for disease conditions, because if we do that, we really get in big trouble with FDA. They're cracking down hard on that. The FDA is, and they're sending out lots of warning letters and getting after some companies for making claims. Now, don't get me wrong, people are doing it, and you can go on the internet and find a lot of people doing making illegal claims for CBD. It's out there, and you're going to see it. But there's a lot of these companies that are kind of here today, gone tomorrow type companies that go on there, make big claims, try to sell a lot, and if the FDA gets after them, they shut their doors and open up somewhere else with a new name. That happens a lot in this industry, unfortunately. We're not that kind of company. Our company has been here for 40 years now, I guess. And we're going to stay. We're not going to be, closing up and opening up under a new name anytime soon. So, or ever really. So, that's something we just don't do. And so we try to, follow the rules and do it right. Cannabis brings a lot of different things to mind when you talk about that particular plant, and it depends on your background and point of view. The guy with the long hair smoking a joint, the hippie type guy, well, that was some of us a few years ago. No, seriously. And, that's okay. It wasn't legal. It was very illegal to do. A lot of people in my generation, that friends of mine, went to jail for that, honestly. So, that's a part of our history that, I don't want to be a part of again, let me put it that way. On the right, though, if you're a more younger person and contemporary person, you may think of CBD as something that you might be recommended by your doctor, because it is sometimes now. So it depends on your generation, the kind of image that you have of CBD. And it's still right now sort of hanging in the balance. CBD oil, I kind of like to think about CBD as a great guy with some bad relatives. If that makes sense. You know, how would you like to be a German immigrant with the last name of Hitler, for instance? Well, there are some, actually. But, you know, that kind of gives you a bad name. People look at you and say, you're who? And are you related to? And that's kind of the situation we have with CBD right now, because people say it comes from cannabis plant. You know, that's where marijuana comes from. You sure it's not good? It's a good thing to use. And if you look at the little bag of it, it looks like the little bags of marijuana that we used to sell back in the 60s and 70s. So the first thing is it really the same? And honestly, that's a good question. The taxonomists, people who specialize in naming plants and animals, disagree on that topic. The genus is cannabis for sure for both hemp and marijuana. But the species, marijuana is definitely sativa. Cannabis, indica may be what you call the hemp plant, but it's kind of a borderline issue whether it's a separate species or just a separate variety of sativa. So we don't really know, but there are a lot of differences between the hemp and the marijuana. The hemp plants are very low in THC, and the marijuana plants are quite high in THC. So there's a very big difference in what it's used for. The hemp plant has a long history of use of making ropes, and it has been used for fibers for clothes and for a lot of things like that. A little bit of the history. Cannabis has been used as a remedy since ancient times. The Chinese Emperor Xin Nung, around 2700 BC, wrote a book on remedies and included cannabis in it, in that book. It was used by American and British doctors in the 19th century as a medicine. Marijuana was listed as a Schedule I drug under the 1961 convention, however, and it's been considered an illegal drug ever since. Now, that's beginning to change in the United States, but it's in process change for marijuana. Became a favorite mind-altering substance of the, quote, beatniks, probably a term you haven't heard in a long time. They were kind of the precursors to the hippies of the 1960s and 70s. Marijuana continued to be the drug of choice of many of the hippies who came along later. But of course we had also new drugs like LSD, cocaine, mescaline, heroin that soon became popular, and marijuana was just kind of lumped into the same category as all of those other drugs. So people, you know, went to jail for that, and people in some places are still going to jail for selling marijuana. It's pretty rare that you get put in jail for using it unless you have prior convictions, something else. But it depends on the state you're living in. And for the people who don't live in the United States, yeah, we're kind of different here. Every state has a lot of separate laws from the other ones. We don't have a major set of laws that apply to every state in a lot of cases. If you murder somebody, you're probably going to be tried under state law, not under the law of the United States of America. But here it would be North Carolina law that you'd be tried under, unless it's considered a hate crime, and then it's suddenly elevated to the federal government, and you'd be tried in federal court. So we have a lot of different laws, and it really complicates a lot of these issues in the United States. But in the past, there was no real distinction between marijuana or CBD and the other drugs. Well, recent developments in the United States in CBD, the laws that have begun changing at the state level, if you look at about 10 states in the United States right now, with a very dark green, almost black looking, it may look black to you, actually marijuana itself has become legal under state law. Now, most of the other states, with only 4 states being the exception, have sort of partial laws, either comprehensive medical marijuana laws or CBD, low THC product laws that are legalized. And so you can see that most of the states, including North Carolina, they have a route for legal CBD in the state. Federal law is less clear, and that's because of the FDA and their regulations. And part of the problem is really more of a technicality than a real concern on the part of the FDA. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Well, I was going to mention South Korea. South Korea is the first North Asian country to allow CBD use, and they've allowed medical use for CBD oils now. They warn citizens, they're really tough on marijuana, however. They make a clear distinction. They've warned citizens that they go to Canada, where marijuana is legal, and use it, they're subject to arrest when they get home. They say if you're a Korean citizen, it's illegal for you to use marijuana anywhere in the world. That's pretty hard-nosed on marijuana, but they have legalized CBD. In fact, from what I understand, it's on their equivalent of their Korean eBay now, being sold and becoming fairly commonly sold. But that's a pretty new law in Korea, just passed in November, I believe, of 2018, so it's less than a year old now. And so a lot of people are still trying to figure out what they can do in Korea, kind of like here. What really changed CBD in a big way in the United States was the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill by Congress. It removes cannabis from the Schedule I drug list as long as the plant and the final product contain less than 0.3% tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, the substance that makes you get high from marijuana. The plants have to be grown by a registered grower, and the government actually comes in and tests the THC of the plants when they're mature. The extracts for THC content, that gets kind of dicey for the growers because if they're a little bit high, you know, they have to destroy their whole crop. And that's where you really get into some sticky problems for growers, because sometimes it's hard to control it in that narrow range. Then you get an issue in processing. When you concentrate and make the CBD oil, suddenly you've concentrated that oil and it gets higher than 0.3%. But you can't sell that to the public. You can make it, but it has to be diluted back again to below 0.3% in whatever you're selling. Now, 0.3% THC, you compare that to if you made an extract of marijuana. They have got cultivars of marijuana now that extract will contain as much as between 30 and 40% THC. They're very strong, a lot stronger than what the people were using when I was younger. Now, the whole plant won't be that high, anywhere close to it, but the extract, when they make the oil from it, it can be as high as 30 to 40% THC, that oil can. So that's a pretty powerful substance. Recently, in an interview, Representative Mark Pocan from Wisconsin asked the FDA director, Dr. Gottlieb, how active the FDA was in considering different pathways for food and dietary supplement regulation of CBD. And Gottlieb answered that, I'll say at the outset, we heard Congress loud and clear with respect to that legislation. He's referring to that farm bill that legalized the growing of hemp for CBD. I understand that Congress wants there to be a pathway for CBD to be available. Now, this was the director of the FDA saying that. So they're looking for a pathway that doesn't, cross the line in their rules, is what that essentially means. It seems clear that the FDA does not consider natural CBD to be harmful. They've stated as much repeatedly. And indeed, the studies are pretty good. No study has really shown that I'm aware of that natural CBD has any side effects that are anywhere serious at all. So it seems to be a very safe substance. It also seems clear that FDA is looking for a path forward to make CBD legal, and at the correct dose, and make it a safe product. It is likely they are concerned about setting a precedent that could be used to justify skirting other things as well. However, and I'll just sort of, before I go on to this slide, just explain a little bit about the problem that FDA has. They have a regulation that if something is applied for as a drug, it cannot be later utilized as a supplement. Now, something that's a supplement can be made to a drug later. That's okay. But the problem with CBD is that back in the 1970s, I believe it was, and I was trying, before I gave this talk, trying to find that particular thing, but it goes back pretty far. A company actually made a new drug application for CBD oil. That particular company never really went anywhere with it, but that was on the mark, that was applied for, and it was approved for a study. That, in the view of the FDA, took it out of the realm of dietary supplement because they can find no evidence that CBD oil was used as a supplement prior to that application. Now, if it had been used as a supplement prior to that application, that would not be a problem. We wouldn't be talking about this issue today. But because of that, their regulations say it can never be used as a dietary supplement. Now, obviously, they're trying to skirt that, but they're trying to do it in a way that they can justify and not change their regulations. Now, CBD oil has been approved for a couple of drugs, actually. Just in the last 3 years, there's been, I think, two CBD oil or extract drugs that are approved and on the market for epilepsy and seizures. But those are not the drugs that are giving us a problem. It's that long time ago drug application that has made it difficult for FDA to approve CBD oil as a supplement. But it's pretty clear that they're going to get around that, and it is going to be available as a supplement soon. In fact, it's already being sold as supplements very widely, and FDA has not been enforcing that. What they are enforcing very strictly is when you make claims for it. If I say that CBD oil will cure your toenail fungus, they're going to come after me. It probably doesn't do that. I have no idea. I was just using that as an example. But that would be a drug claim, and that would be illegal, and FDA would get after anyone making such a claim. Now, cannabidiol, CBD, is a phytocannabinoid discovered in 1940 and is one of roughly 113 cannabinoids in cannabis products. There's a bunch of them. Most of them are there in really tiny amounts, but they can account for up to about 40% of a plant's extract. Now, if you'll look at the pictures over here, THC and CBD, you'll notice that they are almost the same. But if you look down at the very bottom of that molecule, you'll see an O on one side and an OH on the other side. That's the only difference between CBD and THC from cannabis. It's that little ring got broken there. And believe it or not, that makes a big difference in what it can do. The CBD doesn't bind to a receptor very well, a CBD 1 receptor, which is in the brain primarily, but in other places too. And the THC does bind to it much more strongly. And that one little change there makes a huge difference in how it affects a person. So they're almost identical, but you don't get high with CBD oil at all. So that's a very, very important difference. So what is in CBD oil? Well, there's a lot of things in CBD oil actually, and you can see a list of the different CBDs and their contents on the right there in one particular extract. This one has a total CBD of about almost 50%. That's all the CBDs in that particular extract where it's concentrated to. THC is 1.85%, which of course is higher than the 0.3% that's allowable, but this isn't the product that's actually used by people. This is the concentrate that you use to make the product. So by the time it's diluted back down, in most cases it's either coconut oil or MCT oil they dilute it with, but it can be olive oil or other things. But it'll be diluted back down to the very low THC content. But there's a lot of other things in that oil too. There's a lot of terpenes in there. You can see some of them. And if you're not sure what a terpene is, think turpentine. If you know what that is, how it smells, that's one of the terpenes actually. The pinene is what gives the pine scent in pine oil, or one of the things. But you see limonene, pinene, and a lot of different things. And these are actually pretty valuable bioactive compounds. And there's a lot of benefits to these things in themselves besides the CBD oil. Also, you've got the flavonols, camphorol, apigenin are in there, two very good bioactive compounds that we can use in dietary supplements fairly commonly. So there's a lot of good things besides the CBD in CBD, and that's an important point, because some people are making different CBD products. Some of them are made synthetically, and you don't get all those different things. And honestly, I'm not sure what you do get in some cases. Some people are separating out just the CBD, making a concentrate that's to make it totally THC free. When you do that, you also remove a lot of those other things that can be pretty valuable. So I'm not a real fan of doing that, but that's something that is being done, so they can claim THC free. Well, where does it come from? It comes from the whole plant. The farmers cut it off at the ground, and they grind it up and extract pretty much the entire plant, not the roots. And that's where the CBD comes from. However, if you look at the top of the plant, there's little buds up there at the top, and in this picture, and that's where the strongest amount of CBD is. That's where the highest concentration is. And the when I say they do that, some of the companies do just take the top off, but most of the ones that grow it out in farms, and like in Colorado, they'll take the whole plant and do it. So that's where it comes from, it either way. Now, one of the problems the farmers in Colorado have had is when the inspectors come, they usually cut off that little top part and assay it for CBD. And if it's above 0.3%, they have to throw the whole crop out. And there's been, like thousands of acres of CBD, of cannabis, destroyed because of that being too strong. And that's really an issue for the farmers because they use the entire plant. And they say, well, let's assay the whole thing, but the inspectors don't want to do that. And they just take off the top part. So it really gets, there's a bit of disagreement between inspectors and growers out there about the right way to do that. But at any rate, that's the way it's being done now. Now, I will say there are other parts of the hemp plant that's fully legal and has been for years, always has been. Hemp seeds, for instance. You can buy hemp seed to snack on. They're perfectly legal. They don't contain any THC, and they were never a problem, even before the new laws. Also, the hemp seed oil. You can buy hemp seed oil. It's never had an issue with any problem. The FDA says it's perfectly legal now and always has been. Also, hemp seed protein is available. Again, expensive, but perfectly legal. So that has there's been no controversy at all with those products. There's different ways of growing the hemp too. Hemp can be grown outdoors in farms, and that's where the biggest part of it is grown, actually. There's big farms out in Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, different places with thousands of acres of hemp being grown. But it also is grown inside in greenhouses or under artificial lights. And all of these methods have their advantages and disadvantages. Of course, being out in the fields is kind of the more natural way of doing it, but you have more problems with pests and things like that you might have to use pesticides on or something like that. You can control in a greenhouse a little bit better those kind of things and not have keep the pests from coming out, filter the air coming in, things like that. Have a little bit better controlled system that may not need as much of a pesticide. The ones with the artificial lights are the ones that you can really control everything the best and have the most consistent product with, because you don't worry about different amounts of rainfall, you don't worry about different amounts of cloudy days versus light days. You have all the conditions are constant, so you should be able to get the same amount of cannabinoids from one batch to the next of growing and have a very consistent profile. So that has a lot of advantages too. All those are good, and all of them have their advantages. So I'm not going to really come down and say that one way is better than another on that. CBD can be synthetically made, and I have heard reports of people having problems with synthetic CBD, and I don't know why they have problems, and there could be several reasons. One that I'm suspicious of is when these people are making it synthetically, they may be making some things other than CBD by accident. A lot of times you get into biosynthesis and you get unknowns in that synthesis product that you don't know about. A really famous case happened in the 1980s with tryptophan in the United States. A very good Japanese company was a manufacturer of tryptophan, and they changed their process a little bit. They took some purification processes out of their process, and they were about 30 deaths in the United States as a result of the tryptophan being contaminated with some unknown contaminant, and they have never figured out what it was. There's a peak X, they call it, on a chromatogram they are suspicious of, but they've never really identified exactly what that peak X was. And I'm sure they could by now if they went back and tried, but I haven't heard that anyone has. But that peak X was suspiciously present in a lot of the product that caused the deaths. And it was basically an immune reaction to it that the people died from. And I don't know, to this day what happened, but I do know that this is something that can happen. A few years ago, well, it's been probably 20 years ago, when MSM was just being made, there was a person that knew my father from Louisiana, I think, and he called him up and says, "I've got MSM, I'm making it down here, and it's hard to get right now. Do you need some?" And we did. And so my dad bought MSM from me. He says he was making it in his lab, and he was a chemist, he knew how to make it. So we ordered some in and sent it off to be tested. And the lab came back and said, "I don't know what it is, but we can't find any MSM in this. It's supposed to be pure MSM." And I don't know what the guy made, and the lab said, "We don't know what this is, but it's not MSM." MSM is a pretty simple molecule, actually. And sort of called the guy up and said, "Well, the way I'm making it has to be MSM. There couldn't be anything else." And well, the lab said there's no MSM in it. So obviously we ended up, well, I'm not sure whether we got refunded from that guy or not, actually. But anyway, we never used it in a product, fortunately, because sometimes coming up with some of these sulfur compounds like that, if you don't have the right thing, you have potential for problems for people. And I'm glad that we caught that. And honestly, just to look at what the powder looked like, it looked like MSM. But, it was different somehow. And we sent it off to more than one lab, just to be sure. So, I don't know, but I'm suspicious that people are making synthetic CBD that don't know what they're doing, first of all. And that's a problem if that's happening. Secondly, when you make a synthetic CBD, you have just that CBD. The sheet had all those different ingredients, you're missing all those. And a lot of people really feel like, and I tend to agree with them, that there's a synergistic effect with a lot of these terpenes, flavonols, other, not just CBD, but some of the more common CBD derivatives too. And we don't know for sure. There haven't been enough studies out there taking CBD isolate, one molecule, comparing it to the broad spectrum of CBD ingredients. So I'm very strongly in favor of a natural, full spectrum CBD product right now. Definitely I wouldn't mess with synthetic, and I'd prefer not to mess with the pure isolate CBD. There is one reason why somebody might want to use that product, and that's that 0.3% THC. If you're an elite athlete competing in sports, I cannot say for sure that wouldn't show up in one of the random drug tests if you're using it. Those tests can be pretty sensitive and pick up very small amounts that would not even affect you, but if it's there, it might cause you to fail that drug test. And if you're a professional athlete, you really don't want to fail a drug test. So they may be afraid of that. And some people have told me that besides that the drug tests that they're commonly using are not that precise. And some of the CBD peaks in there may come off in a similar peak as the THC. And because the equipment they're using isn't quite up to snuff, so to speak. And so that could be a problem too. some of those peaks, and Dr. Sang over here would know better than me if that's a very likely scenario, because he does a lot of that. He's here with us today, but I don't know if that's a possibility or not, that some of those peaks would sort of co-migrate with the THC and HPLC. That I know that kind of thing can happen in some of the older equipment. The newer equipment should be able to separate those, but I don't know what they're using for the drug tests all the time. Well, talk a little bit about CBD safety before we go here. This study published in Neurotherapeutics reported that other research has demonstrated CBD to be safe in doses up to about 1,500 milligrams per day in people. No ill effects on mood, no loss of motor function, and no signs of any kind of adverse effect. So that's a lot higher than people are actually using in CBD. Very few people will take more than 100 milligrams per day. And most people are taking about 25 milligrams twice a day. So, we are really at much, much lower doses than what this study or this paper indicated is safe. It also noted that it's known to act on serotonin receptors and TRPV1 receptors, which is a pain receptor, but also it's involved in metabolism, glucose regulation, and a lot of things. TRPV1. It's quite a versatile receptor there. And actually the CBD receptors themselves are believed to be the most ubiquitous receptors, the endocannabinoid receptors in the body. They're just everywhere. So they're very common. Another CBD safety study looked by Hamilton from the University of Kentucky in mice gave up to 63 milligrams per day in a mouse. That's more than most humans take at a human dose. Again, a very large dose for a mouse. No adverse effects were observed. Their field exploratory behavior was not altered. Usually mice like to run around a lot and look in little places, and they like to explore new places. So they're kind of active, curious animals. And that wasn't affected by CBD, so it didn't have any mind-altering effects is the point of that. They weren't lethargic. There was no hyperthermia, no changes in mobility. So their motor coordination, you know how you are if you're high on something, you kind of get a little bit unsteady and lethargic, and that didn't affect the mouse like that at quite high doses for a mouse. So we're seeing that it's really a very different product from THC. The hemp to cannabis oil, you've got your cultivation, and this is something you really need to be able to check. Starting with the preferably organically grown, or at least grown without pesticides if possible, because some of these oil-based pesticides could find their way all the way through into the oil. So try to avoid that if you can. Extraction process, that's become pretty standardized. I don't think that varies much anymore. People are using the CO2 extraction primarily and coming out with a pretty consistent, good product. Accurate testing is the oil before you make the product is absolutely essential, because you've got to know what your balance of CBDs, make sure you don't have too much THC, that you get your concentrations right. So the testing is more important in CBD than just about anything else. And finally, the manufacturing. And what I would say here is that if any way possible, use a company for CBD that you have known and trusted for making other products. There's a lot of startup companies out there, fly-by-night companies that are making and selling over the internet and stuff, and you don't know what you're getting. There's reports of CBD out there that don't even have CBD in them. So, you try to use a company that you know and trust. and that's something that I would say, and not go on the internet and buy the cheapest thing there. That's usually a bad way to go. Well, you probably noticed that I didn't talk much about efficacy of CBD, and that's, of course, like I said, about because of the way the FDA is so strongly enforcing it. It's illegal for us to tell you what it will do for you. And so we don't, but you can find that information pretty readily. You'll see it all over the internet, but I would encourage you not to rely too much on all the information and all the claims on the internet. Balance that out a little bit and see if you can substantiate it from something a little bit better. A lot of people are too lazy to study on their own, and that's an unfortunate thing. I'm guessing that the people that have already listened this far into this talk are interested enough in learning about this that they'll take a little bit more trouble to go study on their own a little bit. And I'll give you some resources. Whenever I'm learning something new, I almost always go to Wikipedia first. It's unbelievably pretty good, surprisingly good, how well they do on a lot of their information. And usually if I'm learning something new in science, I'll go to Wikipedia first, because there's new areas coming up all the time, and see what they have to say. And they'll I've seen articles cited on Wikipedia that weren't even published till 2 or 3 days prior to that. I mean, people are putting stuff on Wikipedia just instantly almost. So it's really usually pretty up to date. It depends on what the topic is, but honestly, that's a good place to start. It's very brief, it's not thorough, but it's a great place to start and get some very basic information. They're usually very conservative on Wikipedia, just because you've got people, any of these scientific things, you've got people from two different standpoints that are back and forth, and so they try to sort of balance both views, and they come out sometimes a little wishy-washy, honestly, but that's okay. You get to see that on Wikipedia. Now, once you get there, you'll probably not be satisfied if you've gotten enough information. If you go to nih.gov, they have a search bar on the top. With CBD, for instance, you can type in CBD, and you'll get about 4 pages of studies listed, and you can click on the links and look at the studies. And the titles will usually talk about, is it CBD in pain? Is it CBD in something else? You can look at those studies. And if you don't want to read the whole study, you can get their abstract right there and just see kind of where the study is going and get an idea of what they're thinking in that study. Now, if you really want to get intensely into studying it, you go to pubmed.gov. You'll type in CBD and probably get about 46,000 different hits come up. You're instantly overwhelmed. That's why I say nih.gov first. With PubMed, there is so many things that come up that you'll just about have to narrow your search. You couldn't say just CBD and come up with meaningful information too easily. You'll get hits on CBD, but it'll be just thousands of them. So you'll want to put in CBD, and if you're interested in CBD and pain, for instance, you could put CBD, pain, and something like that, and just see what comes up. If you're interested in CBD and cough, put in CBD and cough. You may not get anything. I don't know. I have no idea on that one. But you have to narrow down your search on PubMed, because it's just not, it just overwhelms you if you don't do that. Well, good luck. We will have a CBD product coming up very soon, I believe. We're working on that. It could be as early as the next week or two. And we're working on more of them. So we're working on this actively, because I honestly believe that CBD is a product that has a lot of benefits. I want you to learn a little bit on your own about that, but it seems to have a very good efficacy for a number of significant problems that people have. So learn about how it might benefit you, whether it will benefit you, and uh, and check back with us. We are going to be dealing with people that we know who are actual growers of the plant itself, and we will have a very high quality product. I'd hope to have it actually by now, but we don't. But keep in touch with us if you're interested in CBD. We are going to have it, and it's going to be very, very good. And thank you for joining us today.